On January 15, 1947, at 10 in the morning, an enigmatic event took place in the golden lands of Los Angeles. A woman who was walking with her 3-year-old daughter on the west side of South Norton Avenue in Leimert Park found in a wasteland something that at first glance looked like a mannequin cut in half. But as she walked closer, she realized, terrified, that it was the corpse of a young woman. The murder had a great social impact, mostly because of its violent nature, which inspired many books and films. Today, it's one of the most famous and brutal unsolved mysteries in the history of Hollywood. The case of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. Who was Elizabeth Short? Born in 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts. She grew up in Medford with her mother and 4 sisters. When she was 6 years old, her father abandoned them after suffering a financial crisis. What's odd is that he faked his own suicide. Then he left his car empty by a bridge. Thinking that he was dead, her mother raised her 5 daughters all by herself. A few years later, the father miraculously showed up, and Elizabeth Short, who was 18 by then, went to live with him in California. Her dream was to become a big movie star, though there was no reliable information about movies or projects in which she had participated. In 1943, without her father's support, she went off to live by herself. She got a few part-time jobs as a waitress, a cashier, a model, just to pay the bills. Those who knew her described her as a porcelain doll, one with black hair, light-colored eyes, extremely beautiful and very friendly. During the 6 months prior to her death, Elizabeth Short mostly lived in Los Angeles, staying in various hotels, apartments, boarding in private houses, always on the move. She didn't stay long in any one place. In Florida, she met Matthew M. Gordon Jr., member of the Army Air Force, who proposed to her from India. She said yes, but he died soon after in an accident in 1945, before he could return to the United States. On January 9, 1947, she comes back from a trip to San Diego alongside her new partner, Robert Red Manley, a 25-year-old businessman. He helps her getting a room in the Biltmore Hotel and then leaves. Apparently, Elizabeth told him she was planning on going back to Massachusetts the next day. But first, she'd meet her sister who was visiting from Boston. This last part was confirmed to be a lie. Red Manley would be one of the last people to have seen her alive. As one could imagine, he was one of the first suspects, though he was proven innocent. A few years later, he would be admitted into a psychiatric hospital for suffering from nervous breakdowns and auditory hallucinations. A great deal of what happened between January 10th and 15th is still unknown. On January 15, 1947, the body of Elizabeth was found in a wasteland, in a strange position. The details of the scene are extremely shocking. The body had been washed and blood drained. It was pale and cut in half. Her torso was waist-high, cut in half with surgical precision. Her legs were fractured with a bat. They had ripped out her uterus, spleen, heart, and intestines. She was mutilated. A true slaughter. Her mouth, cut from ear to ear, gave her a dreadful look, much like the Glasgow Smile. According to reports, the victim had been tied up for at least 3 days, and they had tortured her in the most wicked ways. The autopsy showed that she died between the afternoon of January 14th and the morning of the 15th. She died due to a shock caused by the serious gashes on her face, plus a cerebral bleed. Her fingerprints were sent to Washington, D.C., where they were able to verify her identity, as there were police records of her from 1943 for underage drinking. The press quickly got to the scene of the crime, and a reporter from a famous paper took several photographs of the incident. 9 days later, a man claiming to be the killer contacted the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper by sending him a package with Elizabeth Short's documents and belongings. Everything was covered with gasoline, so the police wouldn't find any traceable fingerprints. The sender used horrifying cuts from newspapers and magazines to write the letter, stating that he would turn himself in only if they gave him 10 years in prison. He called himself the Black Dahlia Avenger. Among the items sent to the newspaper, there was a planner, property of Mark Jansen, owner of a chain of movie theaters and a famous nightclub in the city. According to rumors, he was obsessed with Elizabeth. It's known that Mark and his wife housed her for a period of time in their apartment, despite the fact that he became one of the main suspects. Mark Jansen had contacts in the police department and was declared innocent after all. Another suspect was Elizabeth's father. He denied the suspicions emphatically, saying he hadn't had any contact whatsoever with his daughter for 3 years. He even refused identifying the body. Her mother had to take care of it again, but under false pretenses. A newspaper's editor made her believe that her daughter had won a beauty pageant, when in fact she had been the victim of an atrocious homicide. Journalism can be very cruel just to get a good statement. In the end, they would offer her money to go to Los Angeles to get involved in the investigation exclusively for the Examiner newspaper. On January 26, 1947, the newspaper received another letter from the supposed killer. In this case, he stated the exact place where he would turn himself in. Ultimately, he changed his mind and vanished. The crime and its investigation were on the front page of newspapers for 35 days straight since the discovery of the body. The Los Angeles Police Department conducted a thorough investigation. More than 750 people were working on the operation, bringing more than 190 suspects, but making 0 arrests. The city council offered a $10,000 reward, equivalent to $100,000 nowadays, for anyone that could give significant leads about the case. Due to this, more than 50 men and women gave false confessions, claiming to be responsible for the murder, which caused more chaos and confusion. Years later, those numbers would rise to more than 500 testimonies, making it continuously harder to close the case. Sergeant Finis Brown stated, "No lead had any conclusions. Once we'd find something, it seemed to disappear in front of our eyes." The murder, as one would have thought, impacted the whole country. It's believed that the vast coverage interfered considerably with the investigation. The media got and made up news first before the police did. They also misused evidence and held back information, as it happened with the testimony of the victim's mother. The gutter press took this case slightly, portraying it in an eccentric way, saying that Elizabeth was an adventurer walking around Hollywood Boulevard, that she played around with men before rejecting them, that her skirt was too tight, and that she was wearing an expensive blouse, that she was pregnant, a lesbian, a prostitute. According to press records, the nickname Black Dahlia from the flower was given to her for always wearing black clothes, which contrasted with her pale skin, and for wearing the flowers to decorate her hair. Employees from a kiosk in Long Beach said that male customers called her that anyway. It was most probably made up by the media. The term is also associated with the 1946 film noir, The Blue Dahlia, premiered a year before the crime, and it tells the story of the disappearance of a girl. Though most documents from that time are now lost, or at least closed to the public, in 1999, homicide detective Steve Hodel studied the case intensely and came to the conclusion that his own father, George Hill Hodel, was one of the main suspects back then and had been the real killer of Elizabeth Short. Due to the fact that the corpse was found mutilated with incredible precision, many investigators thought that only an experienced doctor or surgeon could have been responsible for that. Subsequently, many doctors were accused. Among them, Steve's father, George Hodel, a respected doctor. He had studied surgery and had a clinic specializing in sexually transmitted diseases. His practice was just a few blocks away from the hotel where Elizabeth was seen alive for the last time. Steve believes Elizabeth might have been one of his father's patients, and according to witnesses, they might have been lovers as well. George Hodel owned an extravagant mansion in Hollywood and would throw parties where many celebrities from the film industry attended. A picture taken presumably in the residence shows another actress who went missing in those years, Jean Spangler, who was also never found. Steve also believes that his father might have been responsible for the crimes of the Zodiac Killer, another criminal who remains unknown. Added to this, the psychological profile of George Hodel matched to a great extent the wicked nature of the crime. He was charged for sexually abusing his daughter, and there was proof that linked him to the death of his secretary and to illegal abortions. There are recordings of George Hodel that came to light in 2003, in which he admits being one of the suspects of the Black Dahlia murder and finishes off by saying that they could never prove him guilty. The strange position in which the body was found, particularly the angle of her arms, also resembled a painting called Minotaur from famous surrealist painter Man Ray, Dr. Hodell's close friend, with whom, supposedly, he shared dark fantasies with. It's speculated that the murder was part of an artistic piece in association with his friend. Like an exquisite corpse, the crime so horribly shocking that it could stay engraved on the popular consciousness. Some experts suggested that a series of violent crimes that took place between 1935 and 1938 in Cleveland, Ohio, could have been the work of the same person who killed Elizabeth. Known as the Cleveland Torso Murderer, it's said that he could be responsible for taking almost 20 lives, though they could only prove 12. Nevertheless, he was never found. The details of the homicides are horrible, and they share some similarities to the case of Elizabeth Short. The case was also associated to the lipstick murders that occurred in Chicago a year before, for which William Herons was officially charged. According to the investigation, the calligraphy of the messages written with lipstick matched to a large extent the letters sent by the alleged Black Dahlia murderer. William Herons was sentenced to 65 years in prison, becoming Chicago's longest-serving prisoner. He claimed he was a scapegoat and suffered police brutality, where they had forced him to confess. Another suspect was George Knowlton. His daughter Janice, after undergoing recovered memory therapy, confessed to have seen her father kill Elizabeth Short. She claimed her father and Elizabeth were having an affair, and that she was actually staying in the garage when the crime happened. Supposedly, she had assisted her father in dismembering the body. There are many other theories which involve folk singer Woody Guthrie and several doctors, including Dr. Patrick S. O'Reilly and Dr. Arthur McGinnis Faught, and even the editor of the magazine Los Angeles Times, Norman Chandler. Surprisingly, many Hollywood stars were implicated in the incidents. Some believe there was a high-class satanic cult where people from the industry performed sexual rites. As unbelievable as it sounds, even people like Walt Disney and Orson Welles were in the spotlight. 3 months before the crime, Orson Welles had created the set called The House of Mirrors for his film The Lady from Shanghai, where he used several mannequins cut in similar ways to Elizabeth Short's corpse. He was known for having quite a temper and adopted strange behaviors during that time. Supposedly, the victim had an affair with a producer associated to the famous director. Curiously, Columbia's president requested the scene shot in The House of Mirrors to be cut from the film. To this day, the crime is still the most obscure mystery that was never solved. Something similar to what happened in the late 19th century in London when they were investigating the crimes of the unmistakable Jack the Ripper. James Ellroy's novel from 1987, The Black Dahlia, analyzes the case from fiction and explores the concept of paranoia and corruption that dwelled in the spirit of the city of Los Angeles after World War II. Brian De Palma adapted the novel in 2006 with a film by the same name that, as well as the book, wasn't true to the facts in real life, and also, it didn't live up to his previous work. In 1994, John Gilmore published Severe, the true story of the Black Dahlia murder, which proposes to be an essential investigation of the case, though many people think otherwise. Actually, the author's father was an officer of the Los Angeles Police Department when the murder took place. The book contains many unpublished pictures. David Lynch was very interested in this document, and he even thought about buying the rights to make the cinematographic adaptation. David Fincher was another director interested in bringing the story to the big screen. Eventually, both projects faded away. The case inspired many tributes, books, movies, television series, and video games, and cocktails too. To this day, in the Biltmore Hotel, where she was last seen, they prepare a signature drink called the Black Dahlia Martini. Some say her dazed ghost still walks around in the hotel's hallways. Whether we believe it was all part of a conspiracy or just another murder in the hands of a sadistic killer, the true identity of the criminal will always remain unknown. Some believe it was the city of broken dreams that truly killed her. Elizabeth Short's murder is, without a doubt, a symbol of perversion and corruption of the dark side of Hollywood.